ProductTank Taipei meetup, please raise your hands. Great and excellent. I'm so happy to see a lot of new faces and also the old friends. So to begin with, let me introduce ProductTank quickly. ProductTank is a community for product people and by product people. It was founded in 2010 in London, United Kingdom, and now spans over 185 cities across the world. So ProductTank Taipei is founded in January 2016. We have around 7 organizers, and I'm lucky to be one of them. So organizers from ProductTank Taipei, please wave your hand. So we have a lot of people also outside. Okay. And we've held about 19 events in the past 3.5 years. If you don't want to miss future events, please scan this QR code right now. And every event is free. We offer the opportunity for you to listen to great stories about building products. And since building great products requires all kinds of professions to work together, so no matter what kind of roles you play, you're always welcome to join us. And we're very lucky to have the sponsors' support. With their support, we're able to host so many people today in this great venue. Please give them a big hand. Next, I'd like to introduce the sponsors and their previous engagements with ProductTank Taipei. First, PicLodge. PicLodge is an application to make your photos come alive in simple steps. It's the easiest way to send photo and video greetings to friends and family. It has already surpassed 200 million downloads worldwide. PicLodge is a longtime partner with ProductTank Taipei. We've held more than 10 events in PicLodge office. We are very grateful to the support given by PicLodge. Only with their support, we are able to grow to this thriving community today. So PicLodge is looking for people to make the world fun and creative together. If you're interested to know more about PicLodge, please go to their stand over there. So the team from PicLodge, please wave your hand. Right over there. And also, some of the team in the front seat, please raise your hand. Thank you so much. Okay, second, Arc and Comentor. Arc helps you hire remote developers and engineering teams easily. Their mission is to empower talent to do the work that matters from anywhere around the world. Comentor is a brand under Arc. It's now the largest platform for anyone to get live one-on-one coding mentor. There are over 15,000 engineers giving live programming help from all over the world. In ProductTank number 15, Comentor shared their experiences in the EdTech space. The story they told was actually about how they discovered the problem of hiring engineers for so many companies while they were growing the Comentor service. Arc and Comentor teams spans across 8 countries in 4 time zones, with main office in Taipei. So if you're interested to know more about Arc and Comentor, you can go to their stand over there. So the team from Arc and Comentor, please raise your hand. Right over there. Okay. So third, Mozilla. With their latest product release of Firefox Lite 2.0 last Monday. The brand new Firefox Lite is the lightning-fast and lightweight browser on Android phones. You can also stay up-to-date news with and play more than 100 popular free games without installing gaming apps. In ProductTank number 13, Mozilla shared their experiences in building the new product in Southeast Asian emerging markets. They took 9 to 12 months from doing product discovery to finding product market fit, which is really amazing story. Mozilla Taiwan is the team behind the product who drives Mozilla's recent efforts into the emerging markets and mobile internet space. So if you're interested to know more about Firefox Lite and the Mozilla team, please go over to the stand over there. So the team from Mozilla, please wave your hand. Right over there. And some people over there, wave your hand. Thank you very much. Okay, fourth, Pinkoi, with their latest refreshed branding. Pinkoi is Asia's leading online marketplace for original design goods, digital creations, and workshop experiences. Pinkoi enables you to find everyday products to express your taste and lifestyle. Also, with Pinkoi, any occasion becomes a chance to find that one-of-a-kind gift, making the moment uniquely special. In ProductTank Taipei number 14, Pinkoi shared their learning after attending Mind the Product conference in Singapore this year. Partnering with Pinkoi, we're able to share ProductTank Taipei's first experience to Mind the Product Conference, which is the world's largest conference on product management. Pinkoi team spans across 5 market regions with headquarters in Taipei. If you're interested to know more about Pinkoi, their stand is over there. The team from Pinkoi, please raise your hand. Right over there. Okay. Last but not least, Business Weekly. Founded in 1987, Business Weekly is the most influential business magazine in Taiwan. Business Weekly is also the publisher of Marty Cagan's book, Inspired. So if you have not obtained the book, we strongly encourage you to visit Business Weekly's stand just outside the entrance. And getting a book after this event is probably the purpose that you should carry with you today. Okay, so finally, let me introduce you Marty Cagan a little bit. Marty is a revered product coach and consultant in Silicon Valley and around the world, and he is also a thought leader in the global product community. Before founding Silicon Valley Product Group to pursue his interests in helping others create successful products, Marty Cagan served as an executive responsible for defining and building products for some of the most successful companies in the world, and he will mention some of them later. So let's welcome Marty Cagan on the stage. Please give him a big hand.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Oh, that's right. Switch. You also have the clicker, power. Where's the power? Here we go. Okay. There we are. Anyway, so this is an informal talk, actually. This is I have been doing this lately. I change it actually all the time. What it is if you've been doing product for a little while, you've almost certainly run into challenges, difficulties. If you haven't, you probably haven't been doing product for a while. That's what happens. So it's normal that there are a lot of hard problems that you run into. And I wanted to just talk about those hard problems. These are actually the things that I'm working with teams on right now. They're things I'm writing about now. They're very active topics. But I find it's useful to kind of get these things out on the table and chat about them. This is it's a nice sized group for sure. It's not too big. You should feel free to interrupt or ask a question anywhere you want, anytime you want. I will have extra Q&A on anything you want to talk about at the end. But and also, if you're uncomfortable asking the question in English, just ask it. Like Jason would have no trouble, or probably a lot of people here will have no trouble translating for me. So feel free to just ask anything. I will also say this is, if you're brand new to product, this is going to be a rough talk because it's more advanced. We are talking about kind of second level issues. So if you're brand new to product, well, I'm a little worried if you're brand new to product, I might scare you away from product. There's a possibility. How many of you would say you're either a product manager or product owner in that role right now? Just, can you raise your hand if you're in that? All right. And how many of you are designers of any type? UX designers, product designers? Oh, good. I love seeing so many designers. How many are engineers? And how many might be like a head of product, manager, director, VP product? Anybody? Couple. They're not brave enough to raise their hand. So, anything else in the room? Marketing? One. But, okay. Any data analysts in the room? Data scientists? Yeah, a couple. Good. All right. So, I'm focused this really, to be honest, my interest is product teams. I'm interested in the combination because every great product comes from a product team. It really does. Without good design, without good engineering, without good product management, you just don't have a successful product. So I'm interested in teams. However, I do spend a lot of time talking about product management for one main reason. It's because there's plenty of people that talk about design and really a lot of people that talk about engineering, but almost nobody talks about product. And I think that's a big hole. And it's why, well, I make no secret of this, I think the biggest problem in our industry is that we have capable engineers and capable designers, but we often don't have a capable product manager. And that's a big problem in our industry. It's not because the people aren't smart or anything like that, it's that they haven't been trained. Nobody taught them how to do product. I was incredibly lucky. I learned the way almost everybody I know who learns product well learns it, which is from a manager that actually knew what they were talking about and cared enough to coach you. I realized during my first 10 years of my career, which was at HP Labs, it was for the entire time, 10 years, most of that was as an engineer, but for the entire time, I always had at least one person who I was told specifically was there to help me become better at my job. And I thought everybody had that. And then of course in the real world I realized that's not true. That a lot of people have nobody helping them to learn the job, especially product managers. And unfortunately this is one of those unfortunate consequences of the move to Agile. Pretty much everybody around the world I've found in our world has moved to Agile. However, they think that they go to a certified Scrum product owner course and they think they're a product manager. And they're not, of course. That doesn't teach you. The product owner responsibilities is about 5% of the product manager job. So you should go to a CSPO course if you haven't gone to one. But that is not going to teach you how to be a product manager. And that's the real problem we have in our industry. So if you're lucky, you work for somebody who has done product well at a great product company and is now cares to teach you and coach you. That's where most people really learn product. So anyway, just to finish on my background. So I did start from engineering. A lot of product people came from engineering. But honestly, a lot of product people come from everywhere. They come from all over. There's no really one source. And I know great product people that came from design, great ones that came from marketing, from sales, from service, from everything. So I was very lucky. For those that don't know, Netscape was the original internet company. In fact, Mozilla was born out of Netscape. It came from the browser team, and then and Netscape was a remarkably great place to work, and I learned so much, and I worked with some really great people. I would also say that that's where modern product management was really born, only because before Netscape, before the internet, the main way we did product management was referred to as the Microsoft style of product management. It was the to be clear, Microsoft now has really kind of caught up to the internet, but for a long time they didn't. And Microsoft was way before the internet. They were, in the same time I was at HP, and they were the thought leader in how we did desktop or client-server computing. The problem was the Microsoft way of working was not working with the internet. And Netscape was the first company to run into those problems. And so there were several people there. The most famous one was Ben Horowitz. Some of you know that name. Ben wrote a great book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. If you haven't read it, it's one of the best books in our industry. It was written for startup founders and product managers. Because coincidentally, Ben just published last week his second book, which is I just finished it and it was fantastic. It's called Who You Are. I always get it backwards. Who you are is what you do. No, what you do is who you are, something like that. But it's actually a really fun book it's all about product culture, what makes a great culture. I strongly encourage you to read it. But anyway, there were some great people there, and a lot of us were figuring out how we needed to do product. And those techniques spread quickly from Netscape to Google to Amazon to, well, a few years later, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, but just kind of spread as those people moved around. Anyway, when Mozilla was born, which was when Netscape had lost the browser wars to Microsoft, a lot of us went to different parts around the industry, and I joined the young eBay. The founder of eBay was Pierre Omidyar, and I really loved what they were trying to do, and so I joined as their head of product and design, and that was a great experience as well. And then after eBay, I just wanted to work with startups, and so that's really what I do. Myself and a handful of other people, we're only 5 people at SVPG. We just invest and advise startups, really, growth stage companies. And I also wanted to write, and so I wrote a book, and yes, this new edition just came. I wrote a second edition last year, and that one has been translated to about 10 different languages now. So that's why I'm here. Actually, is I'm doing some book launch activities, and I'll be in China tomorrow, mainland China tomorrow, and then Japan. There's some conferences. So anyway, there are these issues are in no particular order. They're just kind of random, but they are really common problems, at least pretty much everywhere in the world that I've been. And if I didn't say this is actually my first trip to Taiwan. I'm embarrassed to say that because I've been to mainland China since 1996. It's my first visit there at the invitation of the government as part of Netscape, actually. But then, many of you may know, actually, a lot of the Silicon Valley engineers came from Taiwan, and so I've heard about how great this place was, but I've never been here yet. So it's I don't really know how far along the curve you are here. I don't know how your companies might be different from other places yet. I will actually get a better sense from your questions. So that's why I really love the questions, for sure. But anyway, one of the biggest common problems out there is there's sort of a backlash right now against both lean startup techniques and Agile. And it's predictable, but it's unfortunate. And I wanted to kind of make sure you understand what is important about lean startup and what's important about Agile. Most of it's just marketing. It's just hype. But there is real essence there too. And that's why we need to really make sure we don't lose that. If we look at Agile and lean startup, there really are a couple principles each. In terms of Agile, if you pull away all the stuff around it, there's really 2 things that are going on. One is you should be releasing frequently. What that really means is no less frequent than every 2 weeks. If you're releasing once a month or once a quarter, even if you call yourself Agile, you're not even getting any of the benefits. So minimum of every 2 weeks. And you probably know this, but good product teams are releasing many times a day. That's called continuous delivery. If you're not doing continuous delivery, it's not really critical you should. But if you're not releasing at least every week or 2, that's a big problem. And the real benefits come from Agile by forcing your test and release automation to the point where you can do that. And that's most companies are getting that benefit. The second one, though, is where the real promise of Agile is, and it's what most teams are not doing. What they're doing is they're told they're Agile, but their management is just giving them a roadmap of features. Every month, every quarter, they say, build these features. That's not Agile in any meaningful sense. And what Agile is really about is having teams that are empowered. What empowered means, it's a buzzword today really, but what it really means is the teams figure out the best way to solve problems. So instead of management giving you a roadmap of a bunch of features like integrate PayPal as another payment method, they instead say the problem is not enough people from Japan are buying our products. And so international conversion rate is too low. So fix it, please. Figure out a way to fix that. That's what an empowered team is. They go figure out the best way to do that. If integrating PayPal doesn't help, then they go look at something else. That's really the difference. And that's really the power and promise of Agile. In terms of lean startup, there's really two core principles that are behind it, and they're important. The first is that we know we need to learn fast in order to innovate. Innovation is a function of how many ideas we can actually try, because we just know most of our ideas won't work. So that's one principle, and the other principle is we want to minimize waste. Waste is the classic form of waste. I meet startups all the time and they tell me they're working on an MVP, because everybody says that, right? And then they say, and I say, great, show me the MVP. And they say, well, we're working on it. It's going to be 4 more months until we have one. This classic 4-month MVP. That's not an MVP, honestly. That's a very half-baked product. A real MVP is more like 4 hours, maybe 4 days, not 4 months. And so waste is spending 4 months to find out that's not a good way to solve the problem. That's waste. So what we're trying to do is minimize those things. Now, and these are really why lean startup and why Agile are important, and you shouldn't step away or move away from that. Now, what you need to see is, why is this such a problem? Some of you may recognize this diagram. It comes from one of the most famous Agile coaches, Henrik Neiberg. Many of you may have heard of him. He was longtime coach at Spotify, which is another good product company for sure. Interestingly, I just had dinner with Henrik, and he just decided to stop being an Agile coach, and he joined because he missed being a developer. He is now a developer on Minecraft, interestingly. So he's back doing what he loves. But the idea is, what he was trying to share here was, this was basically Waterfall. You would take, you'd think, pretend we're trying to build a car. And this is his example, and I don't think it was a great one because people get confused by it. But pretend you're trying to build a car, and the idea is you'd spend months to figure out, does this work, and does this work? And instead he said, don't do that. Let's just build something we can actually test. And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, well, let's try this. And so you can get closer and closer to a car. Well, if you're a product company, this is a really slow and wasteful way to move. And so in a product company, we realize we have 2 very different objectives. The first one, and this is every tech product company has these 2 problems. We have to figure out what to build. That's the first point. When we say figure out what to build, I refer to that as product discovery, but that means coming up with a solution that's valuable, customers will buy, it's usable, they can figure out how to use it, it's feasible, we know how to build it, and it's viable. It'll work for our business. We can sell it, market it, support it, pay for it, stand behind it. That's what we mean by viable. And on the other hand, we need to also deliver a solution that our engineers can release with confidence. What that means is that it's solid enough to run a business on. So it's got to be reliable, scalable, performant, maintainable. That's what internationalized, localizable. These are the kinds of characteristics of a product. Now, some people refer to this as, the oldest way to refer to this as build the right product, build the product right. Many of you have probably heard that, it's been around a long time. But it goes by lots of terms, not just discovery and delivery. But those are our two goals. The problem is, and where most teams get into trouble, is they try to do both of these things at the same time with the same people. So literally, they have the developers doing that. And the way, let me actually go back here. They do that, that's what's going on here. They are both trying to figure out what to build, at the same time, they're trying to build it. That doesn't make sense. That's why there's so much waste. So in a product team, we separate those risks. The first risks are, in discovery, we are trying to come up with a product that's valuable, usable, feasible, viable. But in delivery, we now know what we need to build. We have reasonable confidence that it's going to be something we can sell and can run a business on. So now we have our engineers focus on building that out in a reliable way. And this, I want to be clear, this is not a process. Please don't confuse this. The reason you know this is not a process is there are many delivery processes. The two most popular ones are Scrum, many of you know that, and Kanban. Those are the two most popular, but there are many other delivery processes. And similarly, this is not, there are many discovery processes as well, many, like 50 different discovery techniques and processes. So this is just a conceptual model. All it says is we have problems to solve instead of features to build on a roadmap, so we're given objectives. If any of you have heard of the OKR technique, objectives and key results, many of you have heard of it, that was invented in companies using this model because it's a technique for the empowered team model. That's what this is. You're given objectives rather than features. So you're given objectives, the team figures out the best way to solve the problem, and then they deliver it, they build it. It's not really meant to be complicated. That's the product backlog. Yeah. Does that make sense? That's a conceptual model. I mentioned the old way of describing this was build the right product, build the product right. Some people, for example, at early Google, they would describe this as fake it, make it. Fake it before you make it. In fact, there are still teams at Google that describe it that way. At Facebook, move fast, don't break things. It used to be break things, but now it's no, don't break things. My favorite way actually is Airbnb. You guys know Airbnb. The way they like to describe this is, and this is going to sound weird to many of you, especially the engineers in the room, but it's intentional. They describe discovery as build things that don't scale, and they describe delivery as build things that do scale. Because they know when they say that, that's what it means. There are some seats here if you would want. Right up front. Okay, so that's the general idea. And whether they talk about it in these words, not always, but this is what all the good teams I meet, this is what they're doing. They're making sure they are tackling the risks up front so they know what to build, and then they're building it. Now, it's really important to realize that engineers, this is their main job. Engineering, building product code, deliver products. Most of this is prototypes. In fact, I think I have that here. This is prototypes, not products. MVPs should be prototypes. It causes a lot of confusion because the P, minimum viable product, it's product, but it's a misnomer. It really should always be a prototype. So I just use the term prototype so people don't get confused. If you're doing a 4-month MVP, that's the problem, right? 4-month MVP is way too slow for discovery, but it's also probably too fast for delivery. So nobody's happy. Prototypes in discovery, products in delivery. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. That's really important to make sense for product teams. In fact, there's 3, I don't want to get too sideways on here, but when I meet a product team, the first thing I need to do is figure out where they're at. And it's really easy. If they tell me they're on a 4-month MVP, then I already kind of know where they're at. But if they don't, and let's say they're doing things in reasonable ways, but I want to know how far along they are, there's really 3 things I'm looking for. The first is, are they addressing these risks before they have their engineers write a line of code? That's the first critical thing. Tackle the risks up front before you build. The second is, how do they actually solve problems? In the old waterfall way, the product manager would define requirements, throw it over to some designer who would make it pretty, right? And then they'd throw the whole mess over to engineers at sprint planning and say, build it. And even though they call it Agile, right, that is pure waterfall. I mean, just to be clear, that's what it is. It is literally artifacts going from one to the other. What I'm looking for is not that. I'm looking, do they actually solve problems by a combination of a product manager, designer, and engineers, give and take, back and forth, coming up with a solution that works. That's collaborative problem solving rather than sequential solving. So that's the second big thing. And the third big thing I'm looking for is, what is the goal? If their goal is to ship a feature, that's output. If their goal is to solve a problem, that's outcome. And we're looking for teams that focus and measure themselves on outcome. If those 3 things are going on, none of the rest really matters. I know that's a good team. Those are really the 3 things I'm looking for. All right. So, a lot of companies, most companies that I meet today around the world, have kind of understood the very basics. They know they need product managers, they know they need designers, so it's not just engineers, they're cross-functional. Some people call them product teams, that's what I usually refer to them as. Some people like Spotify's term, they call them squads. That's all good. The problem is, it's not that hard to get a squad to kind of construct these cross-functional teams, but most of them, the ones that haven't gone where they need to go to these 3 things I described, most of them still just do roadmaps, and the team is just there to not discover and deliver, but to design and code. So they're actually just doing, they might even call it discovery, but they're not. In fact, I can tell they're not, because one of the things I ask is, how many things are you trying in discovery and how many are you building? And if they tell me, oh, well, last month we did discovery on 10 items and we built 10 items, then I know that's not discovery, that's just design. Because if they're doing any kind of discovery where we're actually testing these risks, they're going to throw away most of their ideas, at least half of their ideas. By the way, good companies, the really good ones, are throwing away 80 to 90% of their ideas. Microsoft just said that publicly recently in a Harvard Business Review article, that only 10% of their ideas turn out to work. Which is, the only thing surprising about that was that they admitted it publicly, because that is very common for good companies. So, I want to know, are they just doing design with a little usability testing, or are they actually testing the ideas? All right. Now, if they're not, what they probably have, and most companies that have, well, they call them product teams, but most companies that have these squads, what they really are feature teams. They are They have a product manager, they have a designer, and they have some engineers, but the product manager, honestly, is a project manager. This is really common. Now, if we go back here for a second, these are the 4 big risks in product: value, usability, feasibility, viability. You probably know that your designer is responsible for usability. They also contribute more than that, but at least usability. The engineer is responsible for feasibility. Of course, they contribute a lot more too. If you're a feature team and you're given a roadmap, then this is not explicit, but this is what's going on. The executives that argued that something get added to the roadmap, that executive or stakeholder is the one that's taking responsibility for value. In other words, if somebody says we really need to add PayPal as a payment method, whoever said that believes that that's valuable, or they wouldn't have said it. And similarly, they're saying, and I'm going to make sure that's viable. The product manager is there really to project manage in that model. Now, in an empowered product team, a real product team, we're given problems to solve, objectives, rather than roadmaps. And so in a real product team, the product manager has to make sure value is there and viability is there. So when we talk about a modern product manager, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a real product team, not a feature team. And I have to be honest, the job of a feature team product manager is much easier than the jobs of a real product team. Way easier. It's a lot less stressful, there's a lot less skill involved, a lot less hours in a day, but it's not that project management is not important, it is, but that is not the heart of a product manager job. Okay, so that's a really important one. I will tell you, this shows up in so many places. Most of the organizations I meet that are older organizations, like pre-internet organizations, they almost all have these big digital transformation initiatives, if you've heard that phrase, digital transformations. Well, what's really going on is they've put in place feature teams, and they still haven't figured out that's why they haven't really made any difference. Most of those digital transformations fail because what they really are trying to do is get to this. But they don't really know that or understand that yet. The reason I say that is because the real reason they want to do a digital transformation is because they know now that they're competing against companies like Amazon. And to be clear, this is the Amazon model, the Google model. That's what's going on. And they know they need to compete against them. Unfortunately, feature teams, even though they look like product teams, they're not product teams. And when you talk about the product manager being the CEO of a product, if you've heard that, that's talking about product teams, not feature teams. Okay. I honestly have no idea what the state is in Taiwan for this. I can tell you even in places like San Francisco or New York or Seattle, only about 10 or 20% of the companies have real product teams. The rest are feature teams. So your guess is better than mine about where you're at here. It's a common problem all over the world. In fact, I should have said that right at the beginning. One of the things that a lot of people think is that, all these great teams are in San Francisco, and then if you go to South Korea or Singapore, they haven't figured this stuff out. It's totally not the case. In fact, first of all, in San Francisco, there are many terrible teams. I see them all the time. And it's amazing to me because they're often right across the street from companies with great teams. It's like, why don't you pay attention? It's like, what's going on? So it's a problem all over the world. On the other hand, there are amazing product teams in all corners of the world today. Some of the best teams I've ever met are in Shanghai, and Bangalore, and Stockholm, and Berlin, and just all over. So, yeah, they're not spread by geography. Okay, so this is a big problem though. The next one, again, no particular order, but once I mentioned that a lot of the problems I'm talking about here are once you try to do product, these are the kinds of things you realize. Well, it's not hard for a product team to get the skills to be able to quickly decide, test whether or not a product idea is a good one or not. Like if some executive says we need to integrate PayPal as a payment method, if you learn the techniques of modern product, in just a couple days you can figure out if that's going to pay off or not before you build it. And teams get good at that. Practice a little bit and they get good at that. And unfortunately, one of the things that often happens is the company still has all these executives, stakeholders that are saying, we need PayPal or we need this feature. And the product organization gets really good at coming back to them a day or two later and saying, well, we're not going to build it because it's a bad idea. Here's why. And the problem is, after a while of these executives hearing nothing but, no, we're not going to build it, they get frustrated. They're like, what are you going to build? And I try to tell the product teams that their job is not to just tell the executives why this is a bad idea. Their job is to show them an idea that will work, will actually solve problems. So if the real issue is that international payments is way too low, then what they need us to do is not just say that PayPal is a problem, they need us to show a way to fix it. That's the difference between a good product team and a beginner product team. A good product team knows that they actually have to come up with a solution that works. And you see that in companies because once the team shows that they can do that, the executives start to view them as problem solvers, not just blockers. The first group is viewed as blockers. You may have seen that symptom. It shows up in a lot of companies. This is kind of a tricky one. Here's why. Everybody knows that spending at least a little bit of time thinking about the problem before you jump in is a good idea, right? You've ever heard that, some famous Einstein saying that if I have a hard problem to solve, I'll spend, what does he say, I'll spend an hour thinking about it and then 10 minutes doing it, kind of thing. Here's the thing. Yes, that we have very good techniques for thinking about framing, planning our work. But you also have to be really careful because the moment you start working on a problem for your company, there's a clock that starts ticking. And your CEO, your executives, they're like, okay, it's been a day, it's been a week, it's been a month. The clock is ticking. And if you spend all this time planning, it leaves you no time to actually come up with a solution that works. And very quickly, your executives will lose confidence. And so I try to tell teams, you have to pace yourselves. You can't just do all this analysis and know, because the real hard part of product is not the planning. The hard part of product is coming up with a solution that works. And when I say a solution that works, it's got to be good enough that your customers are actually willing to switch to your product from whatever they use. That is actually a lot harder than it sounds. A lot of beginner product people think there's a strategy is actually called the feature parity strategy. What that means is that companies think all you have to do is get all the features of your competitor, the main features of the competitor, and then we're going to get all those customers. And it almost never works. In fact, Ben Horowitz, who I mentioned before, likes to tell product teams the reason that doesn't work is because to actually get someone to switch to your product, they have to believe it's so much better than what they were doing before that they're willing to go to all the pain and risk to actually switch. And Ben argues that's got to be about 10 times better, which is hard to quantify. 10 times better is, well, I'm curious, because I'm curious how this is answered in Taiwan, but how many of you at your companies are using Slack? Can you, okay, that's amazing, right? Almost everybody. That's even more than a lot of parts in the world. But think about that. All of your companies switch to Slack, probably from something else, like HipChat from Atlassian or something. And that's not cheap and it's not easy to switch, but you've switched because your product teams believe Slack is that much better. Slack is kind of that's the best ever really for a company in enterprise to get that kind of switch. But that's why product is hard. It's got to be perceived as significantly better. And that won't come from planning. You can plan for months and you still won't get there. That comes from prototyping. That's product discovery. Trying out ideas, seeing what works, what doesn't work, iterating until it does. So my point here is if you've got a hard problem to solve, you should spend a little time doing planning, for sure. We have some great techniques that only take a couple hours. But most of your time needs to be doing discovery, actually coming up with a solution that works. If you don't do that, you won't have time. And I say this too, a lot of product managers, and I'm going to stereotype a little bit here, I apologize. A lot of product managers come from like business school. MBAs, do you have that here? Yeah. Well, a lot of product managers come from that, and for whatever reason, MBAs love planning. They just love it. They love their spreadsheets. They just have so much fun. And I'm like, it's like, okay, that's fine. That is not your job. You know, that is the easy part. The hard part is you've got to get your hands dirty. You've got to sit down with your designer and your engineers and come up with a solution that works. All the planning in the world won't get you that. And in fact, because MBAs love this so much, I'm teasing, I know some great product people that are MBAs, but it's sort of a mindset that when I do hire MBAs and product people, I have to break them of these habits. There are some techniques. The most popular one is called jobs to be done. Do you guys hear that technique? But don't get me wrong, it's not a bad technique, but I almost never recommend it because it takes way too long. And if you actually use that technique, you almost certainly won't have time to actually come up with a solution that works. So it's like, don't do that. You can't afford it. If you're Samsung doing a new phone, okay. That's going to be expensive, long-term effort. Maybe it makes sense. But for most of us, it doesn't make sense. We have much cheaper, lighter, faster ways to do the planning we need in a couple hours. And then we can get on to the actual work of discovery. So I just want to be clear, if you're a product manager or a product designer, and that was most of the room, most of your day is prototyping. Yeah, the designer actually creates the prototypes, the product manager plays with them, tests them, learns from them, but together you are iterating on these prototypes. I try to tell product managers and designers use prototypes like engineers use code. That's sort of how we do our work. So that's your day. That's literally most of your day. You'll show those prototypes to customers, different kinds of users. You'll show them to stakeholders. You'll test them with your own team, your own engineers. But this is the real job of a product manager and a designer. It's one of the big reasons why we need real product designers, is because the way designers are trained to design today is through prototypes, and that's so critical for us. All of these prototypes are MVPs. I like to use that term prototype again because I want to emphasize it's not a product, but also because every good product team, there's 4 main kinds of prototypes. And every good product team needs to know all 4. We need all 4, unfortunately, because they all do different jobs, they address different risks. Some are meant for quantitative testing, some are meant for qualitative testing. So good teams need to do this. But that's why. We need to make sure we balance our planning and prototyping work. All right. So this is very related to that last one, but this is again human nature, but it's very common. We're given a problem to solve, like improve the international purchase rate, or reduce our churn rate, customers that don't resubscribe every year, or grow revenue, or get reference customers in this new country, whatever it is. We're given these problems to solve, and we're naturally we quickly come up with an idea, whether it comes from you or anybody else. Somebody comes up with an idea, and we decide to really go after that idea. So we start prototyping. Great. The problem is, if that's the only idea you're considering, and if that prototype doesn't actually, or that one idea or approach doesn't actually pay out quickly, then what do? What most teams do is they just keep trying. They'll do 20, 30, 50 iterations on a prototype before they run out of time or they give up. Instead, what you really want to do is realize that there are always many ways to solve problems. And when you were doing that little planning, like we talked about here, the little planning, you want to make sure you realize that, look, we could address this problem 5 different ways. So let's just keep that in mind. We have 5 different approaches we could try here. We think the best approach is this one, so we'll start here. But if we don't get traction, if we don't get some results quickly, we're going to go to the next one. There's actually a technique advocated by, well, I'm advocating it too. Her name is Teresa Torres. She's a product discovery coach. If you haven't heard of her, she's a very good product coach. And she popularized this technique called opportunity solution trees, which again is a nice, quick, lightweight approach to planning and thinking through that frames our work. All right. This is a totally different topic, but one that there's no secret in our industry. We have not done a very good job dealing with thinking about ethical risks. In other words, I mentioned the 4 big risks: valuable, usable, feasible, viable. I am trying to encourage teams to consider a 5th risk, which is, should we build it? So, in other words, just because our users love it, is it good for those users? I mean, if the user is a 14-year-old teenager and you've succeeded in getting him or her to spend 4 hours a day on her phone, is that a good thing? You know, if it's educational technology, probably is a good thing. But if it's yet another game, maybe not. And so we have to look at that. And it's not just about this kind of risk. It's also, is this good for society? Is this good for our business? Is this even legal? Some of the things companies are doing are right at the edge of whether or not it's legal, and this is clearly not good. Now, what you have to realize is that most of the time, it's not like the company is intentionally creating problems. That it's unintentional. But what I try to point out is that it's usually the product managers are the first people to see the problems that are coming, because they're right there on the front with users and customers, understanding the impact of the business. And so if you see issues with what you're building, you really want to raise that issue, raise it to your manager, potentially to your CEO, which is of course a very sensitive thing. You have to do that gently. You have to make sure you've done some homework to really understand how your business works, but clearly we need to do more of that as an industry. All right. Totally different kind of problem, but a really common problem today. There are great tools out there for optimization. If you know products like Optimizely or Test and Target or Google's Website Optimizer, these are popular tools for optimization. And just to be clear, optimization are low risk, live data, A/B tests typically, where we are basically tweaking things and seeing if we can make it a little better. The most common thing we do that to is our funnel. And I strongly encourage every team, once you have something in production, if you have real traffic coming, every team should be running these tests. There's really no excuse not to. The problem I'm talking about here is I meet so many companies where that is all they're doing. And I tell them, if that's all you're doing, you're on a slow death curve. That is, because that's called value capture activity. It's like a price increase. It's a good thing, there's nothing wrong with doing it, but if that's all you're doing, you're gonna be, chewing up your value. Our job in product is to create more value than we capture. Product discovery is actually value creation. Optimization is value capture. So don't just do optimization. Make sure you are creating more value. Okay. This is another one. And this sort of gets to company culture. When you meet a company, usually you can tell pretty quickly what their culture is. Some are very data-driven cultures where the CEO believes very strongly in data-driven decisions. In others, the CEO believes very strongly in his or her gut instinct, and you'll hear that. And it's very qualitative, and this gets to be cultural. And I try to explain to both of those leaders that every good, really without exception, every good product company has to be good at both, because they answer very different questions. The quantitative testing tells us what's actually happening. The limitation and the problem with quantitative testing is it can't tell us why. In other words, this will tell us that 3% of people are swiping on this in the app in the phone. It can tell us definitively 3% of people are doing it. What it can't tell us is why the other 97% are not. That's what it can't tell us. That's what the qualitative testing is there for. So every good company needs to be good at both of these techniques. And even companies like Google is a poster child for the data ones because they have so much traffic, but Google has actually been doing the qualitative testing even longer. Apple is the poster child for qualitative, but they do quantitative just as well. It's more, I'd say it like this. At Google, the standard test is a quantitative test and qualitative is used when they need to explain something. At Apple, qualitative test is what they do every day, and quantitative is what they use when they need to get some data. They're both using both, it's just they clearly each have a bias. It's hard to argue with either of them, they both fit. But they're different, Apple is doing a small number of consumer electronic devices. Google has got 8 services with over 1 billion users now. So it's, they're different scenarios. All right. So pretty much everything I just talked about depends on this. And I mentioned at the beginning that I think one of the biggest problems in our industry is that most of our product people, what whatever their title is, product owner, product manager, are not trained. They haven't actually learned how to do their job. And so the problem is they're not yet competent. And just to be clear, product manager is the job title, product owner is the role they play on an Agile team, right? Just like delivery manager is often the job title, Scrum Master is the role they play on an Agile team. So it's just a role. And if you're a product owner that is not the product manager, that's a different issue, and it's a problem. Normally, you really want to make sure the product manager is the product owner. But the job is product manager. Okay, so this issue of competence, what does that really mean? I argue these are the 4 things that your product team is depending on you as a product manager to be able to bring to the team. If you don't have this expertise, well, I should be clear, if you're a feature team product manager, you don't need any of this. It's true. All you need is to be reasonably good at project management. But if you want to be an empowered product team product manager, like we're talking about, like at these good companies, then this is what you're signing up for. Your designers and your engineers are counting on you to have this knowledge, bringing it to the team. Because if you didn't, every single decision would have to go to the CEO or some executive, or you'd have to have all these stakeholder meetings where they all come together and vote on everything, which is a nightmare. So, first one, deep knowledge of your actual users and customers. This usually takes 2 to 3 months for the product manager. In fact, I can't tell you how often I get an email or a call from a product manager that I know, or that knows me somehow, and the person will complain to me that the CEO constantly overrides him or her, just constantly says, this is what you're doing, stop arguing. And it's just so common. This is what happens. I'll say, so tell me, when's the last time you were at a customer? And usually the answer is last month, last quarter, something like that. And I'll say, okay, when's the last time your CEO was at a customer? And the answer is usually like almost every day, right? Customers are coming in, he or she is going out, they're all constantly doing this. And I'm like, look, if I was your CEO, I wouldn't trust you either. I wouldn't, why in the world would the CEO let the product manager make critical decisions if they don't even know the customers? It's totally unreasonable to expect that. This is the most fundamental thing, is to really know your users and customers. I remember the person who was coaching me on product at first when I was an engineer moving into product, and I remember, and I want to be clear, I didn't say this before, but for the most of my career, actually, with the exception of eBay, all the products I did was for developers. I love developer products and tools, and it's a fun space. But anyway, I was a developer doing products for developers. I got this, right? I know customers, they're like me. And the guy who was coaching me, his name was Mike Bacco, he said, look, he knew this. He knew that I didn't know anything really about our customers. And he said, look, before you're gonna be allowed to make any decision, you have to go visit customers. This was HP customers. And I remember he made a couple calls to the sales organization, and he said, you're gonna go on a trip. It was a 3-week trip, and he said, you're gonna visit 15 companies in the US and 15 companies in Europe, and we'll talk after your trip. And so he just made some calls to the sales organization and told them the kind of companies he wanted me to visit, and this is a normal thing. And it only took 3 weeks, like I said, to visit 30 customers. But at the end of that I was a completely different person I really was. First of all, I realized the hundreds of ways that our customers were not like us. Just not at all like us. I learned that a developer is not a developer. They're all different, especially a company like HP, a tech company versus HP's customers were banks and insurance companies, and oh my gosh, the level of training the engineers had. They didn't even call themselves engineers. They were just like programmers or analysts, and so it was just so different. And of course, he didn't even know, because his specialty was not developer products, but he just knew that you're never like your customer, and you have to go really meet these people. And anyway, I had a crash course in what our customers really cared about, which turned out, of course, they had very real problems and very real needs, so that was the good news. There was plenty of great products to come, but they were not what we needed internally. And I also made relationships with the users and customers that even some of them to this day on LinkedIn, we're still connected and friends. So, and not just relationships at customers, but also with the sales organization. So I had a whole network I built that really helped me understand how our customers worked, how our products were sold and marketed. There was so much I didn't know. It was just so much I didn't know. And that is the first thing the product manager needs to bring to the team, is deep knowledge. You have to be considered one of the experts in your users and customers. For consumer products, it's not usually that hard. For B2B products, it can be real work, because B2B products can be complicated. There can be lots of kinds of users and approvers and buyers, and you have to know the dynamics. Second, the product manager needs to have deep knowledge of the actual data that our customers generate by using our products. That's a difference today versus when I first learned product, because frankly, this was pre-internet, we didn't have the volume of data that we have today. Today, product managers start with about a half an hour to an hour a day in the data tools every morning. Usually there's 3 different data tools. A web analytics tool that tells us what they're actually doing on their phone or on their computer. Second is a data warehouse tool that tells us how this data is changing over time. And the third is usually some form of sales analytics tool like Salesforce.com that shows us what the sales cycle is actually doing. Then the team is depending on us having that knowledge. And we're running live data tests every week as well, so the team wants to know what's going on. That is the second thing they bring. That's really just a different way of understanding our customers. The third is, I'm going to admit to you that for a lot of product managers, this is their least favorite part of the job, is this third one. But honestly, well, the first one is probably the most important. This is probably the second most important, which is you have to know your business. Now, what I mean by that, and in fact, if you've ever heard the phrase, a strong product manager of an empowered product team is the CEO of their product, that's what it's referring to, this one right here. Because the only other job like this is actually the CEO. What it means is you have to know, how is your product actually paid for? Literally, how is it funded? What's the cost structure? You have to know how it's marketed. You have to know how it's sold. That's referred to as go-to-market. How does it actually get to your customers? You have to know what the different constraints are: compliance, privacy, security, legal, everything. All the different dimensions of the company. How is it serviced? Partnerships. All that is, you have to know, because you have to make sure the products that you do will actually get to customers effectively and make money and cover their costs. Yeah. All right, that's the third. And the fourth is you have to have deep knowledge of your actual industry, the competitive landscape, the major trends. Is machine learning relevant to you? to your kind of product. You have to make a decision. One of the challenges with product is you're always looking towards the future. We say you need to skate to where the puck is going, not where it was. That's a hockey analogy, which this is probably not a hockey mecca, but it just means you have to look where things are going in the future, not where they are today. So that's what's expected on a product manager. That's what it means to be a competent product manager. And your manager's job, if you're a product manager, is to make sure you get this before you're allowed to actually make decisions for your team. And I would promise you, if every manager actually did that, it would be a completely different world today. But they don't. And in fairness, a lot of them don't do it because they have no idea. They've never done it. They've never even seen it done well. They never got to work at a company that worked this way. So it's hard for them to do it. But the bottom line is, when I meet product managers that are not qualified to do their job, they haven't actually been trained or coached, my frustration is not with the person, it's with their manager. Because it is the manager that we hold accountable for making sure. And I know when I asked, there was only 2 or 3 of you in the room that were willing to admit you're a manager of product managers. But if you are, I try to tell these people that you're only as strong as your weakest product manager. So you really want to make sure that you are spending the time coaching and developing your product managers. This is the most important responsibility for a head of product, just to be clear. #1 responsibility. There are other responsibilities like vision and strategy and objectives, but everything depends on having strong product managers. Product teams are only as strong as their product manager. And if the product manager is not competent, then you're wasting designer, you're wasting engineers, which are among the biggest costs in the whole company anyway. All right. Okay, just we'll open it up to general questions. This idea of empowered product teams, if you're not sure if your team is an empowered product team or a feature team, well, first of all, if you're not sure, it's probably a feature team. But I would love for you to be sure, and there is a simple 3 tests. This is what we're looking for in a good company. First of all, do you have a truly cross-functional team? What that means is, for your product, what are the sets of skills that are needed in order to do this product? Normally, that's product manager, product designer, and when I say product designer, I mean somebody who's skilled in service design, interaction design, visual design, and usually trained at user research as well. That's a typical product/UX designer. Just to be explicit, it's a lot more than visual design. Okay, visual design is very important, especially for consumer products, but that's the common skill. The skill that we really depend on is the interaction design. Okay, so cross-functional, covering the skills we need. Second, they're empowered, and I mean that literally. It means they're assigned problems to solve rather than features to build, right? Problems to solve. Business problems, customers' problems, but problems to solve rather than given features or projects to build. And the team is allowed to decide the best way to solve that problem. That's the whole idea of an empowered product team. And then the third point is they're actually measured by and accountable for solving the problem. In other words, they're measured by outcome, not output. In fact, in most product teams, most product companies, they rarely talk about time to market. Now, don't get me wrong, their dates are important in product companies. The problem is, it's not hard to hit a date. It's actually, if you've been doing tech products for any amount of time, you've figured out how to meet any date you're given. We just, we cut functionality, we cut quality, we cut everything until we hit that date. The thing is, that is an empty victory. What matters in a product company is not time to market, it's time to money. Now, when I say time to money, it's not always really money, but the point is, time to money means time to actually solving the problem. If the problem is that our churn rate today is unsustainable, 12%, and we know that our whole economics of our business fall apart unless we can get that down to 6%, then the problem is we gotta get it down to 6%. And there's no celebrations until we get it down to 6%. That's when we say time to money means getting to that 6%. That could mean 100 different features that are necessary, or redesigns, or anything. All right, those are the three things we're looking for. If your team has these three things, I would argue that's what you want to be. And the best teams I know all around the world, those three things are true. You can see there's nothing magical about these. There's no reason you can't do this. The main reasons, if you're not, are usually because the CEO doesn't trust the team. Now, in order to get that trust, it really comes back to the product manager demonstrating that they've done that competence I was describing. That's what earns the trust. All right. So, well, I should actually have an image of the Taiwanese version, but you guys, it's new. You guys have them. Also, there's my email there in case anybody does need to leave. Feel free. But we have time if you're willing. Any questions on anything related to product you'd like to raise? There's one in the back. Go for it. I'll just repeat the question, so don't worry about it.
There's a slide shows report core PM competence in terms of strengths, and I'm just curious about deep knowledge of knowing your product. Is it something too essential, or is just really not important to be a core competence?
Everybody hear that? That's asking, don't you also have to know your product? And actually, when I sit down with teams, I have 5, and that is the 5th. So you're absolutely spot on right. I would like to consider that a given. But the reason I have added it in is because I meet product people that don't know their product. And this is ridiculous. Can you imagine that? Being the product manager and responsible for this stuff and not knowing the product? Now that's rarely the case with consumer products because they're usually pretty straightforward. But for B2B products, some of them are really complicated. But if the product manager is not an expert on his or her product, you've got bigger issues. Yeah, you've got very serious issues. And I don't think anybody, including the engineers, are going to have respect for the product manager.
Yeah, thank you.
You. Yes, question.
Hi, I'm Karen. About the Empower product team, my company have tried to do that before, but I'm just wondering, how can we let engineer and designer also find out the solution? I mean, if they don't understand the user side, they don't have the mind, they only want to get the feature, they only want to get the task, and then they just want to do their job. How can we make them want to provide a solution, not just doing their engineering or designing work?
Okay, another good question. There's really a couple parts to that. This is about well, I'm going to really phrase this 2 ways because both of them are important. what you were asking is, what if you have an engineer that just wants to be told what to build and does not want to help discover the solution, right? They just want to build the solution. They don't necessarily want to discover the solution.
Maybe they want to help, but if they want to help, they need more information.
Well, okay. If they want to help, we're mostly there. So let's talk about both of those situations. If they don't want to help, I'm gonna be pragmatic on this with you. All you really need is one senior engineer that does want to help, and then you can succeed. If you don't have a senior engineer on the team that wants to help, you've got a serious issue, and you need to go to the CTO and say, we need at least one serious. And in most good companies, product companies, you can't get promoted from a senior engineer to a tech lead unless you demonstrate your willingness and ability to help on this. In other words, the good engineers don't just want to code, they want to invent. I rarely, it's probably because of the companies I work with, most of them, all the engineers want to do it, especially in the great teams. All the engineers care about that. They don't want to build something that nobody's going to use. It's really depressing to do that. So that's the one situation. The other situation you're getting at, let's say they do want to help, but their main job is to build software, and they might not have time, or they might not have knowledge. That's a bigger topic. Now, the first thing you need to realize, the little secret in product, it's not talked about enough, but it's really important. The best single source of innovation is not our customers, it's not our executives, it's not the product managers, and it's not the designers. It's the engineers. This is consistently. You show me a product you love, I'll show you the engineers that came up with it. It's just consistently. And the reason for that is because the engineers are working with the technology every single day, so that puts them in the best position to see what's just now possible. And that's where great products come from. Now, they don't have to know everything the product manager knows, just like they don't have to know everything the designer knows. That's actually why we need a cross-functional team, because these are very different skill sets. The reason, though, we're cross-functional is because we have to combine our skills so that we have this together. Now, I will also say there is very few things more powerful than when the product manager and designer bring an engineer along to a customer. And it's so funny to me because a lot of product managers tell me they're scared to do that because they don't want to demoralize the engineer by showing them a customer that's unhappy. And I'm like, you are completely backwards. That is the most motivating thing for an engineer, to see customers in pain. It really is. They want to fix it. They really do. I'm not joking. It is really true. This is where great innovation comes from. So it's magical to include your engineers. Now we can't drag 8 engineers along with us with every customer visit, but we can bring one each time, and we'll typically rotate. I didn't say this, but I should have. If you're working on customer or user-facing product, a minimum would be 3 one-hour sessions with users or customers every single week. That would be a minimum. If you're in the middle of something like a major redesign, it's probably 5 to 10 hours a week. So, but at a minimum, 3 hours a week, because we need this dynamic happening. And we have a lot more techniques for it too, but honestly, this is where great products come from. So you inspire the engineers by showing them the problems and sharing with them. And the product manager provides the context. The designer understands the way the user's mental model, what the experience needs to be. And of course, the engineers understand what's technically possible. And when we put it all together, no guarantees, but the idea is when we put it all together, we get something special. That was an excellent question, because that gets to the heart of how we need to do product discovery. One of the really common mistakes is product manager and designer go off and talk to customers every week, and they don't include engineers. You rarely get any innovation that way. Yeah. Question?
I have two questions. You mentioned that we have feature teams and product teams. My question is, why are there so many feature teams? Is that only because they don't have knowledge, or are there any other reasons?
So good, I'll repeat the question is, why? I said there's feature teams and product teams, and I also said that most of them are feature teams. But I also, didn't say this, but you could tell. Feature teams are not very impressive. We would much rather be a product team. So why aren't there more real product teams? That's the question. Well, the basic answer, in my experience, from talking to the CEOs about why are you running like this, the answer is they don't trust the product teams. In particular, they don't trust the product managers. Now, they have, and usually, don't get me wrong, usually they're right not to trust the product managers. Because the product managers have not done their homework. They haven't done what I've said. Now, of course, when they point that out to me, I'm like, well, who hired these product managers? I didn't hire them, you hired them, right? So, look, your fault. So I'll say, look, you need to make sure they're trained, and then you need to give them a chance. That's really the two things we look for. So if you're a product manager of a feature team, and you really want to give a try being a serious product manager, with really using your engineers and designers to do what we're talking about, the most important thing you can do, you'll hear me phrase this as do your homework. Those were the 4 things I listed for product manager competence. The most important thing you can do is do that. Once you've done that, and then you go to your manager or the CEO and say, can you give us a chance to try out working this way? Just for a few months. Just let us try. Now, they'll probably quiz you a bit on, they want to know, do you really know the customers? Do you really know our business? If they think the answer is no, they're not going to trust you. And then, again, they probably shouldn't. But if they believe you do, that's really the leap. And then at that point, once the product managers have earned the trust of the executives, now it's about letting the executives demonstrate that they can let go a little bit. Not instead of trying to control everything, let go. That's hard. For some of them, it's harder than others. There's no question. But it's a strong argument when they see that this is really how the good companies work. Yeah, so I think they normally want to, they don't know how to get there. Yeah, I will say that one of the really common problems, I'm sensitive to this because a number of CEOs have told me this explicitly, that this is where their problem is that they're convinced the product manager really wants to do great things for our customers. They believe that, because most people that get into product, they want to do that. But they say, but that person is completely clueless as far as how our business works. I hear that so much. They'll say that person's naive, or they don't know anything about finance, they don't know anything about the KPIs, it's like a foreign language. And so it's like, I wish it was that easy, that all we had to do was build something that our customers loved. Unfortunately, it also has to work for our business. So what part of doing your homework, it was the third thing, is really understanding how your business works. All 4 of those things normally takes about 3 months for a product manager to go from new to competent. That's not that bad, 3 months. But it does take 3 months of 2 things: a product manager willing to do the work, and a manager willing to help them. Sure. There's a question back there.
Hi, Marty. Thank you for your speech today. I'm Daniel. So we're kind of like working in a more like waterfall team. So I have a question regarding product development. versus documentation. So whenever a product grows over time and your product gets bigger, you have a lot of features and error handling, validation, sort of like that. And also it's really difficult to trace back like what you have done before for your product. So you need to do a lot of documentation, but it actually conflicts with the prototyping idea because you need to write documentation, it takes time, but prototyping, if you want to test some ideas, you actually don't need the documentation. So how would you tackle this problem? Thank you.
Okay, good question. I'm going to break that into two questions because there are two purposes to the documentation you're describing. The first purpose is you have to communicate to your engineers and QA, if you have separate QA, what to build and test. And so that's the first, like in other words, what's the business rules here, what's the expected result. That's, now the answer to that depends hugely on whether it's a co-located team or a remote team. Co-located product team is everybody's favorite, it's just not always possible. But in a co-located product team, we have a product manager, a designer, a tech lead, and 2 engineers sitting about this close together, a little further maybe, but similar, And they, if that's what you have, a co-located team, honestly, prototypes is how they communicate. You need very little documentation for that. If your engineers are remote, it's way harder. And if they're not only remote, but if they're in a different language and culture, now we really got a lot of work. Now, in that case, well, you can tell I'm not a fan of that model. I think you'll go way slower, and you'll also not get that level of engineering involvement that we are desperately in need of. So from the last question. So in that model, you will have more documentation, and then the other thing I strongly try to get companies to do is have at least one senior engineer sitting with the product manager and designer. So there's still some documentation, but not as much if they're all together. But you're right, there's going to be a price to pay. The second kind of documentation you described is, look, we inherit a product. It's probably like 5 years old. 7 years old. It's been around for a long time. And the truth is all the people that initially designed it, and they're long gone, right? And so you don't even know what that thing does. Nobody knows what that thing does. And so for forever, and I'm literally mean 30 years, for 30 years our industry has tried to find a good way to record the reasoning for all the decisions that were made. You know where we are after 30 plus years? The only thing anybody trusts is the source code. It's true. So most companies have literally abandoned the goal of documenting the reasons for what we do. Even if you do try to document it, people won't trust it because they don't even have a way to make sure it's up to date. So this is a very, very hard problem. And so, yeah, that's why most people will go to the tech lead and say, can you look in the code and see what this is actually doing right now? That's why. So I would not worry about the second problem, but I'd focus on the first and try very hard to have co-location anytime you can.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. You were wherever you were pointing. Okay, who was it? Anybody? All right.
Hi, I'm John from Pinkoi, and you mentioned at the beginning about having a discovery team and a delivery team.
It's one product team.
Right, it's one product team. So
Two activities.
Two activities. Okay, so that's what I was asking, because they follow different processes. They have different goals. How do you transition people between the teams, and do you actually have people who stay on discovery all the time, or do you require that the discovery team is the delivery team as well?
All right, that's another really good question. I'm going to go back to that graphic just so I can show you here. Everybody heard it though? So first thing I want to emphasize, because you run into some really ugly problems if these are different teams. This is one product team. All that I'm showing here is two different activities. I could have shown coding and QA as two activities. Well, there's lots of activities that go on in the team, but I'm showing two activities, discovery and delivery. Now let's talk about the second thing I want to point out. You didn't use this word, but a lot of people tend to think of discovery as a phase and delivery as a phase, and you don't want to think of it as a phase. Just like, do you know a phase where they're not doing coding and delivery? It's like every day, every week. We just keep doing that. Similar with discovery. Some days you generate a couple backlog items, sometimes you generate a bunch of backlog items. So they're not phases, they're ongoing. In fact, the full way I describe this is continuous delivery and continuous discovery. So that's the second point. The next point is, if we now view these as just two activities going on, the core of your observation and question was really about the nature of those jobs. The product manager and designer job is a bit different than the engineer's job. The main purpose of engineers is to do delivery, build production quality code. The main purpose of product managers and designers is to figure out what to build. So this is a long way of saying what we do to manage this is we ask the engineers to set aside about 30 minutes a day to participate in discovery. Okay? Now, that is, what that really means is playing with the prototype every day, the current prototype, and looking for two things. Number one, can you think of a better way to do this? Number two, is there anything in this prototype that makes you nervous? We want to know that, right? Because if the answer is yes, it's like we got lots of ways we could do this. And if in fact, you know where that comes from? The single most common complaint from engineers is not, I don't have time for discovery. It's the opposite. Their complaint is, if the product manager had spent even 2 minutes talking to me at the beginning of this idea, we could have saved a month's worth of work. Literally. Especially if one of those decisions touches like a tech debt issue or a legacy system issue. It could be very expensive. In fact, I like to make this tangible for teams. If the first time your engineers are seeing a product idea is at sprint planning, you have totally messed up. Right? And that is what most companies do because they're not working like this. In this model, sprint planning is just choosing, they've already been seeing things all along the way. It's just about what are we going to do in the next sprint. All right, so the first part of this is we need about 30 minutes a day from the engineers. And the product manager designer's main job is, of course, discovery, but we ask them to spend an hour a day answering questions that come up in delivery. Because there will, no matter how good you are, there will always be questions that come up once the developers actually start coding things. Because it's sort of anything that you didn't think through will be obvious there. And the engineers need an answer now to that. So an hour a day is usually plenty for that. So that's the dynamic. One of the nice things is if you are lucky enough to be set up in a truly co-located team, like I mentioned before, the half hour a day happens automatically because everybody's there. You're right next to me. You're the engineer. I'm the designer. You looking at my prototype all day. It's a non-issue. But if we're not together, then we need to have that time. But that's really key. Good question. So, how do you do this? Here's a question over on this side then. Who was it? Had their hand up? Yes, go for it.
Hi Marty, I'm Claire. Thank you for your sharing. I would like to ask you that I do thank you.
I can repeat it, don't worry.
Okay. I do admire the idea of iteration and prototyping, but in a B2B product situation, it's a little hard to do this because we have to keep our system stable to our customer and release a new version of product every few days may scare our customers. So I would like to hear your suggestion for this. Thank you.
I love that question too, because, so the question was, in B2B environment, you know, what's really behind that question is these customers are paying money for this product. Yeah, you know, with free services, we break it all the time. They didn't pay for it anyway, so we can just fix it. That's the sort of view. Of course, it's not really true, but that's the sort of exaggeration. For B2B product, we have to be much more sensitive to change. There's actually this whole topic called impact analysis, and it's called gentle deployment techniques. But the real point of your question is, let's say we are, we need to make change. Here's what's going on. And this is especially relevant if any of you are doing what's called on-premise solutions. On-premise, you know, almost everybody is doing cloud-based solutions, but there are still some companies doing what's called on-premise, you know, servers installed at your customers. That's the extreme form of this problem, because what happens is, so if that's what you were doing, you probably are releasing something like every quarter. And what happens is, the customer gets it every quarter and they go, oh, another release. We have to install it, we have to verify it, we have to make sure everything still works, we have to retrain our people. And you know what, after a year of that, they go, we're done with this. We'll take it once a year. Give us a release once a year. This is called, and even at a quarterly, this is really bad for you and bad for your customers. Less frequently, like once a year, this is terrible for you and your customers. Now, their concern is real. If you're following good practices, the main challenge we have is they should not need to retest. They should not need to retrain. None of that. And in fact, Firefox does this. Chrome does this. That's actually, just to be clear, that's on-premise software. It's obviously installed on your phone or on your desktop, but it is updating all the time. You just don't know it. That's called silent update. And they know that if everybody had to retrain on the browser every time, you know, no, who's going to do that? Nobody wants it. So they know to do this automatically, and that's an example of gentle deployment techniques. But if you look at any of your favorite software, that's what's happening. They are updating it several times a day. And by the way, I'm talking about high-end B2B software. Updating it near constantly, but they're designing the changes so that users don't have to retrain. Now, of course, there's a whole topic about that. If you are interested, just Google the term gentle deployment techniques, and they talk about how to do this. There's all kinds of changes. Some changes are minor, some changes are major. If it's a major change, you'll see something called parallel deployments, when the users can go from the old to the new at their choice, at their pace. So we have a lot of ways to do this, but the requirement, as far as I'm concerned, for a modern company is your customers should not have to go through that revalidation. And it's just, they're doing that because you as a provider have not done what you needed to do. Good question. All right, should we, let's see, go for it.
Can you talk more about the objectives?
Objectives.
How do we know that objective is the most important objective we want to solve in a 2C business?
Okay.
And how outside of the product team, how do we discover these objectives and set it as a goal of the product team?
Okay, big question. What you're really getting at, if I can totally rephrase this question, why are OKRs such a pain? They really are a pain. And what's really going on is that most of the time companies try to use OKRs, they have feature teams. And the notion of using OKRs and feature teams is ridiculous. Because one is saying, here's the problem to solve. Oh, but by the way, here's your roadmap. That makes no sense. So, and that wasn't your exact question, but that's kind of what's behind here. This is a big topic though. OKRs are not a difficult thing if you're already in the empowered team model. If you're not in the empowered team model, I would never recommend OKRs. It's incompatible. So, and that's why so many companies have such a mess with OKRs. Now, you also asked, where do the objectives come from? That's another common misunderstanding. Now, and I'm glad you brought it up because I told you one side of the empowered team model, but I didn't tell you the other side. What I said is an empowered product team, the team is given an objective, and the team is able to come up with the best way to solve it. What I didn't say is, where's that objective come from? And that's why you asked the question. And the reason is because it shouldn't come from the team. This is actually the job of management. When we ask, remember we were saying, how do you transition from a feature team, from roadmaps to objectives? When we ask the leaders to give the team a chance to work this way, you're not taking everything from them. You're letting them tell you what are the most important problems to solve. That's the compromise. The management says the most important problem to solve is retention. It's terrible right now. We need to fix that. That's their job, is to tell you what the most important problem is. And then it's our job on the team to figure out the best way to solve it. Now, don't get me wrong, every good leader I know loves it when a team says, we know retention's a problem, and we would love to work on that. They love hearing that, because that's a motivated team wanting to work on a serious business problem. What they don't want to hear is that every team says, oh, we want to do this. We're going to have fun. We're going to work on this. And it's like chaos. Everybody's going in their own direction. It's one of the really common mistakes when companies move to OKRs is they let every team decide their own OKRs. How is that supposed to end up solving the business goals at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year? So the objectives come from the leaders and the key results come from the teams. That's the basic idea behind this. And a lot of people don't get that. But again, the really thing that's messing that up is they're doing feature teams, so they're not really set up for this anyway. Hopefully that makes sense. I've written a lot more about OKRs in the book, and there's other books on OKRs. Okay. I'll let you. Okay.
Yeah, so I think a lot of, let's say, assumptions are the resources are there. So what happens if, as a product manager, you don't have enough resources? I mean, let's say, in my case, my engineer are being shared by another project. How would you deal with that kind of situation?
Okay, well, there are other models to what I'm talking about, this idea of product teams or squads. Those are dedicated teams. In fact, some people call them dedicated product teams. Some people in Lean Startup, they call them durable product teams. And the idea is they're not shared. They're not shared. If you're sharing your engineers across different product managers, that's called the pool model. The pool model, where there's a pool of engineers and they're working on different things. I rarely even see that anymore. I'm not doubting you. Occasionally I do see it. It's a terrible model. I mean, honestly, it's a terrible model. And I know that there are some old style CTOs or CIOs that think that's more efficient, but of course, it's a lot less efficient because these engineers are not just chess pieces to move from one game to another. These are people that need time to go deep and to really innovate. So it's a different model. Now, every company So let's assume you're not doing that and you've got teams, but you might have a situation where the most common situation is a product manager does not have a designer. And if you're doing customer or user-facing software and you don't have a designer, that is going to really be a difficult challenge. What usually happens, which is not good, is the product manager tries to be a designer. And you know, it's one of those things that's very tricky because it's actually very easy to learn how to use the design tools, but that doesn't make you a designer. That's the thing. And so you get a lot of predictably bad design. So that happens. I strongly encourage, and I often have to have this conversation with the CEO. I'm like, look, if you've got this number of engineers, you're wasting that money unless you have a sufficient number of designers. So you don't, if you have 50 engineers, you don't need 50 designers, but you probably need 5. And if you don't have those 5, what I usually tell them is, look, you have 5 open recs right now in engineering. Move them to design. You'll get a lot more done and a lot better results. So we do have to adjust to make sure you're getting all teams doing what they need to do. The minimum is, if you have user-facing, it's 1 product manager, 1 designer, and a minimum of 2 engineers and a maximum of 10 to 12 engineers. It's something in there depending on the nature of the software. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So you're talking about prototyping a lot.
Yeah.
So I want to know how did that prototyping and Scrum delivery match with like roadmap, because some of my team members really want to consider coherence and scalability, and sometimes we do the Scrum thing, they feel like uncomfortable because we don't know what we will do next sprint. And
okay. Well, there's a number of things in there. And so in terms of, it is really important to everybody on your product team, starting with the product manager, but all the good engineers, they need to know not just what's going on this sprint, but what's going on for the next many months. In fact, to be honest, if you're an architect or a senior engineer or tech lead, you need to know what's coming in years. Now, what does that mean, do a year roadmap? Absolutely no. It does mean doing a product vision. So the product vision, just to be clear, this is another common mistake, is every team does their own product vision. That's just as crazy as every team coming up with their own objectives. The point of a product vision is what's common between all our teams. But product vision is somewhere between 3 years and 10 years out. Now, the reason the engineers so desperately need that, and by the way, the designers need it too, is because they need to make sure they have an architecture in place that will meet the needs of the business. If you're just giving them a sprint or 2 visibility, they are not able to do their jobs competently. So that visibility is critical. Roadmaps are a different question. Roadmaps get us into trouble because now they're details, and the details will change. There is a great quote from Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, which I think he totally gets this point. And he says, be stubborn on your vision, meaning don't give up on the vision. And normally, when Amazon does it, it's generally a 7-year vision. Okay, but be flexible on the details. Stubborn on vision, flexible on details. Roadmap is details. So the last thing you want to do is have like a multi-month roadmap of this is what we're going to build. The reason we get in trouble, if it was just a list of your ideas, it would be a non-issue. But roadmaps are never that. As soon as you put something on a document called roadmap, I promise you, if you haven't figured this out already, you will soon. Your executives will consider it a commitment. And at that point, you are locked in. They're not just ideas, now they're commitments. And that's where we get into trouble because, like Microsoft admitted, 90% of those things are not going to work. So why would you commit to 100 things where 90 of them are going to fail. That's just waste. So, yeah, you can see how all these things, there's a lot of topics here, but they all come together. All right, good question. How about here on the side?
Hi, Marty. Thank you very much for your speech. I just want to know if is there any useful techniques for discovery? Because you said, because our team spend most of our time doing optimization, as you say, because optimization can see the results and it's more predictable. And discovery sometimes is there's a lot of risk. So when we have a goal, like for this month or this quarter, and we tend to spend more time doing optimization work rather than discovery. Yeah, is there? And sometimes when we are doing discovery, it's more like sampling, talking to our user. We are a B2C model business, and picking maybe 10 customers. Sometimes we'll feel uncomfortable to be. This is just a sample, and it's showing the big picture. Yeah.
Right.
So is there good techniques? Thank you.
All right. Well. So the question is, are there techniques for discovery? So as a matter of fact, there is. I wrote a book about it. It's just been translated. I think there might be some copies over there. I'm not exaggerating. When I sit down with a product team, it's 2 full days just to cover the core techniques. There are a lot of techniques. And none of them are rocket science. None of them are things you can't do. They're all things everybody can do if once they're trained. And I want to be clear, I didn't invent any of them. All I really do is I work with a lot of good teams, and when they use a technique, I usually share it with other teams, and if it works there too, I share it with others. So the book is just my current favorite set of techniques for all these things. Like you said, discovery is about risk. It is all about taking risks. You also probably know is the riskiest thing is to not take risk. That's the nature of our business. That's why I said I find so many teams just doing optimization, and I'm like, you guys are going to be in trouble. So you should do the optimization, but that's the easy stuff. The reason and the truth is, if that's all you were doing, your company could probably save a lot of money by not having so many product and design people or engineers. So you need to do it, and you need the techniques. Everybody can do them. It's just education. It is a lot of prototyping. Like I said, there's 4 kinds of prototypes, and there's the 4 main risks: value, usability, feasibility, viability. So we have different ways to test each of those risks, and then we have quantitative and qualitative ways to test each of those. So it's not an easy answer, but there is a real answer there, and I would strongly encourage you to do that.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have time for another question?
About 1 or 2.
Okay, go for it.
So thanks, Marty, for sharing this talk. Yeah, I love it.
Thanks.
So one question I have is, can you share your suggestion on the approaches that a product team should take when the ask from the executive is a really big ask? Such as find the next big thing for the company. Find the next product find the next new segment, the product a user will love that will generate revenue. Yes.
Okay, and I'm actually writing an article right now. My next article is actually on the topic. The topic is how to coach for integrity, because this is really kind of what you're getting at. A lot of times product managers especially are asked for things that they don't know if they're going to be able to do. And what do? If you promise and then you don't deliver, you probably will hurt the trust that you've built with the leaders. And by the way, if your engineers or your designers think you're crazy, they'll lose confidence as well. So how do you manage that kind of situation? It is a really common problem. So a lot of this is about setting expectations. There is, I will suggest, there is a technique something called a high integrity commitment. It's like, how do you make a commitment when it's a really hard question and we don't know the answer today? There is a good way to do that we do. It takes a little bit of time, but the result is a high confidence commitment. So I would Google that term, high integrity commitment, and that will help you with this, but I also think that article I'm writing right now will be helpful for this. But it's, this is hard. There is a, boy, I have no idea if this has ever been shared in Taiwan, but does anybody know what the underpants gnomes are? Has anybody heard of the underpants gnomes? Some of you? Is it here somewhere? They're from South Park? It's a South Park cartoon. You should Google it because it's exactly this. And I have shared that South Park cartoon with several CEOs to point out to them what they're really asking. And of course, if you haven't seen it, this means nothing. But it's a real problem. It's a really hard problem. A lot of teams, by the way, the really good teams, these are the this is what they want to work on. So don't get me wrong, this is great stuff to work on, but setting expectations is critical. This also relates to the OKR discussion because there are actually two kinds of objectives. Technically, it's two kinds of key results. One kind is called aspirational. This is where the CEO says, look, your team, we're not asking you to just tweak this or get a 5% or a 10% improvement. We're asking you to get like a 10x improvement for our business. 10x. Think about that, right? Massive. And when they say that, they're like, we know that's not easy. The chances of getting 10x, not very high. But you know what? We want a few of our teams to actually try. Some people call this moonshots versus roof shots. Roof shot is not hard to throw something on the roof. Moonshot, that's pretty hard. But if you shoot for the moon, you've heard this, even if it doesn't make it to the moon, it's way beyond the roof, is the idea. And so these are called aspirational key results. And the team is told explicitly, you're after the next big thing. You're not there to optimize. So that's what we want you to go after. And it's high risk. Everybody knows it, it's high risk. So it doesn't have a high integrity commitment with an aspirational key result. On the other hand, there is another key result, which is, don't give me a 10x number. Tell me something you can absolutely deliver this quarter for sure. That's called a high integrity commitment. And that is also, you could consider that a roof shot. It's something you know you can do. So that's a big topic, but it's not necessarily a bad one. A lot of teams would love to work on those things. In fact, a lot of people will complain they're not allowed to work on things like that. They're just still working on the same old product they've been working on for 4 years. All right, one more question.
I guess that will be the last question.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Marty, for this amazing
that was the last question.
Sorry for that.
I'm sorry.
We would like to add one final activity for you to take a photo with the full crowd in this room.
Okay.
Yes, and so, and one last thing for everyone, we can use this venue up to 10:15. So after the photo, it's all yours to interact with Marty and also the sponsors' stands afterwards.
Hey, I hope this was useful. So thank you all for coming.
So everyone be seated and we will take a photo right from this place.
Where's the ready? All right.
That's good. I have everybody on the frame. So. Ready? Everybody? 1, 2, 3. One more. Perfect. That's good.
Thanks everyone. Thanks Marty again. Everyone.